I guess it's afternoon now. Good afternoon, Irish Breakdown Land. I am Vince D'Addario, and that is Brian Driscoll, and we are back for another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. And today, we are going to talk about breakout players on defense, and there are some parameters to these selections. And so we do want to get into that a little bit as we go so that you'll understand why we may have picked some people and maybe not picked some people. And
right. Because here's the thing, Vince, right? Like breakouts happen every year for every team. Somebody goes from one category to the next. So somebody goes from, good starter, like good player to like national breakout. Somebody goes from like okay player as a starter to like a pretty darn good starter. Some guys go from rotation players to impact starters. Some guys go from never having played to being really important role players. And so we kind of view all of them as breakouts to some degree. So this isn't like a list of 5 guys that we're predicting are going to be all Americans. We're going to have that show later. This is just more of guys that are going to kind of break out from whatever role they were in last year into a different stratosphere. And that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to be fun because we got some that match on our list, and then we've got some that don't match on our list, which I think is fun too. And frankly, this show could have been 3 hours long with the amount of
we had to cut some dudes out. Right. Like we both had Justin Ademiola on there, and we're like, you know what? Like we're going to do this other show down the road that he may fit better in. And, so we kind of had to do some weeding out in that regard because it's like this show's going to go on forever. We already do shows that are long enough.
Yeah, exactly.
We need to make them go even longer.
And there'll be shows where we talk about these other guys too. So
the hard part, though, Vince, is predicting who actually will be the breakouts.
Sure, absolutely.
And that's because it's going to happen, but who are they going to be? And that's what shows today is going to be about.
Again, and it's also separating the analyst side of things from like who I want to break out, like who I really, I've got some love for these certain players and I want them to break out. I want them to be, the player that we think that they can be and all of that. So there is a bit of that as well to this. And you'll see that as we move forward, but let's kick it off, Brian. And of course we will do a little bit of a mailbag when we're done. So if you've got questions, feel free to throw them in there. We'll star and we'll kind of save them for the end unless they're pertinent to what we're talking about. But we will try to answer some questions at the end. But let's jump right in here. And we're only talking defense. And I will also say true freshmen are off the board. That's a different show. That's a different show because I did have a couple true freshmen. And I was like, okay, let's talk about, you're like, different show.
And we had to weed them out somehow. And so as we thought like about future shows we have coming down, like, okay, I don't want to talk about Justin Ademiola in 8 different shows.
Yeah.
Right. And like Jason Ademiola is already getting talked about a second time because we just talked about him in the disrespected players. So like we won't spend as much time on that. So we're just trying not to get repetitive with guys. So that way we kind of broke them into different shows. So we'll have some of that stuff because the freshman class on defense is going to be very interesting, Vince, because both of your freshmen were on, obviously, the freshmen that you had are both guys that you look at and say, well, this kid could be playing a ton by the end of the year.
Exactly.
That's the very definition of this breakout. But we're going to put them in more of a different show.
So freshman breakouts or something along those lines.
Yeah, who's going to be freshman impact players? I mean, that's really what it boils down to, right?
There's going to be some on both sides of the ball, I would imagine. So, okay, so let's go defense. We're going to start with one that is on both of our lists. Also, I would say the most unsurprising member of this list would be linebacker Marist Liufau. He's on both of our lists. He was a no-brainer. He was the second person I put on my list. He is, and I was struggling because we kind of talked about the tiers, right? You've got not playing at all to being a rotation player, maybe a rotation player to being a starter being a star. He doesn't really fit in any one of those 3 categories because he didn't play last year, but he was penciled in as a starter. So I kind of put him in the first tier of starter about to be a star.
I mean, he's the most interesting guy on the list, Vince, because he's going to potentially go from having like never started a game in his career to not playing at all last year to what we think is a guy that has a chance to be a really, really difference maker in this Notre Dame defense. I mean, and that's why it was like a no-brainer that he was going to, like you said, it was a no-brainer he was going to be on this list, just the very definition of it. Not that he's necessarily going to be their best player, but like, if there's other guys we're going to talk about that, they were really good, pretty good players last year that we think are going to kind of take that next level. If Marist is a guy that has 80-plus tackles and 7 tackles for loss and 2 sacks, that's a breakout season for him. I mean, so like it's easy to throw him into this category. The question for me, Vince, and I think the more intriguing aspect of this conversation is putting Marist Liufau in a breakout category after what he's kind of done the last couple of years, which is, show flashes. But again, he didn't start over Shane Simon in 2020. Last year, he didn't play at all. I'm looking at his tackle numbers for 2020 when he was a good rotation player. He had 22 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, a half a sack.
Yeah.
Right. I think the more intriguing aspect, Vince, and what I'll ask you first is, okay, it's easy to put him in the breakout category, but what level of breakout are we thinking is going to go into? Because he's going to go from doing nothing, sitting out last year, being nothing but like a rotation player in 2020, to a starter and a guy that people are predicting is going to be a good player at Notre Dame at the very least.
Sure.
What's the degree to the breakout that you're predicting for him this year? And I have some ideas I'll share afterwards, but I really want to kind of let you kick this off with Marist is, okay, breakout, easy. What's the degree? What kind of player are you projecting and predicting that Marist is going to be this year?
So here's a very specific prediction for you, okay? Notre Dame obviously kicks things off September 3rd. They've got 4 games in the month of September. They've got, obviously Ohio State away, Marshall and Cal at home, North Carolina away, and then they kick off October. They have a bye, and then they kick off October in Vegas, right? And Vegas is going to be a huge game. Obviously, it's going to be on NBC and all of those different things, okay? But coming off of a bye, it's almost like I don't want to say you hit the reset button, but you do to a degree, okay? Here's my prediction for Marist. I think he is going to be singled out in the pregame show for the BYU game, October 8th, as the heartbeat of this defense. I think they're going to be like, wow, where did this kid come from? And he's leading the nation in this, and he's doing this, and he's flying all over the football field, and all of these different things. I think they do like a little story on him leading up to the BYU game on October 8th. I think after 4 games, we're going to know who Marist Liufau is and what he can do for this defense. And I think they are going to go as he goes. And I think by October 8th, the country is going to see that.
So you're going not just that he's going to be a starter and a good player, but he's going to be a star. I mean, You're thrusting them all into the star category.
Yeah. Maybe that's a bold take at this point.
Well, I mean, that's what this show's about, right?
I think he's got the tools, man. I think he's got the demeanor. I think that he has enough of the flash plays as well that people want to see that, and the NBCs and the ESPNs of the world like latch onto. I think he's going to have a few of those in the first 4 games. And so I think it's going to be easy to point him out and be like, let's do something on him to lead off this huge game in Vegas against BYU.
For me, Vince, I don't disagree with anything you said in regards to what Marist can be. I'm just not quite ready yet to throw him into that star category simply because I just need to see him be a starter first. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So that's kind of where some of my hesitancy is in that regard. But I feel the same excitement you do, Vince. I get excited about the same thing. It's just with him, it's because of the injury last year and because of, the fact that what we don't know yet is, does he have the discipline from an assignment standpoint to be that kind of player? And I think that's really the holdup I still have for Marist. And the only question is just coming from the standpoint of we just haven't seen him do a whole lot. 22 tackles in 2020. I mean, he showed some athleticism in the Bama game. And I think, was it you that I was talking about yesterday, Vince, talking about the first half? No, Sean. I was talking to Sean yesterday, 2 days ago. Sean Davis and I were talking about this. And he was talking about how he just was going back and watching the ACC championship game. And he just was talking about how Marist just flashed so much with his athleticism. Mm-hmm. That's another game you saw. You saw it in the North Carolina game. You saw flashes of it. But the issue that he had the last time we saw him was he would do some plays where athletically, Vince, he's like, God, that dude can flat out run. Yeah. We haven't seen a guy that can run like that since Jalen Smith was here, right?
Right, absolutely.
But then you kind of flip it like, wow, he was about 4 gaps off on that play, right? You know what I mean? Like, why is he running there when the ball's going here,
Yeah.
That could just be normal inexperience, and but the only thing is that's all we've seen. We haven't seen that guy. So those are the big things for me is if he can combine the flip side is you become more disciplined, and then you lose your aggressiveness.
Mm-hmm.
You lose your instincts. You lose your playmaking ability. I think that's kind of what we saw from Shane Simon. Really athletic player, but just didn't know how to, just was so focused on this is what I'm supposed to do that he couldn't play fast, couldn't play loose. Yeah. I have a hard time thinking Marist Liufau is going to do that.
Right.
Just because of the way he plays, and even just what we saw from him in the spring game. To your point about being a playmaker, I mean, the big interception, he sniffs out that screen to Michael Mayer. He jumps the pass.
Right.
It's thrown over his head. He's right there because he sniffed it out. So if he can become a more disciplined player from what we saw the last time he was on the field in a game, I don't disagree, because I think the will position in this defense is going to be geared towards being a playmaker position.
Right. Absolutely.
And then the other thing that we were told last year is that he was their best pass rusher in camp before he got hurt. So how are they going to use that part of his role? And because there was a lot of times J.D. Bertrand came free on blitzes last year and was really close to hitting home.
Just didn't.
Either didn't quite get there, or he missed because he lacks the length.
Sure.
We think he's going to be much better at the mic than he was as a will. Marist won't have those similar problems. He's faster than J.D. He's more explosive than J.D., which is saying a lot because J.D. is a pretty darn good athlete.
Absolutely.
But he's way longer than JD, which is going to eliminate some of that, how the length caused some problems. So I think his usage is certainly going to be there. The question I also have is can he play 60 snaps a game to have enough of the production to do what you're talking about? I think that's the other thing he has to answer, Vince, is we also haven't seen him play a ton of snaps. So all the tools are there. I think if he can put it all together, there's no doubt in my mind that Marist Liufau can be. Because what you're talking about, Vince, is you're talking about him being an All-American caliber player, and that's what you're talking about.
Yeah,
so you're talking about 90-plus tackles, 10-plus tackles for loss, 4 or 5 sacks, multiple interceptions, and then also making plays in big moments. Right, that's going to be the key. Is
absolutely
you can't be that kind of difference maker if you're just putting up numbers. Numbers only tell part of the story.
Absolutely.
Are you making game-changing plays? And I think at the end of the day, that's what I fall down to. I think Marist has a chance to not just put up numbers. He has the kind of skill to make game-changing plays. And that's the thing that if you can add that to the second level of the defense, what's the one thing more than anything else this defense was missing in 2020?
That's it right there. Finishing the big plays. And that's
playmaker at the second level of the defense.
And I think they were in position last year to make big plays. I just don't think that they executed it all the way through. I think there was a lot of that going on, a lot of missed tackles in the backfield. I think that there's going to be opportunities for big plays. I think Marist gets them. And that's what I was referring to when I was talking about doing that piece, right, at the beginning of the BYU game. He's going to have some flash plays where those are game-changing type plays. I think he's going to have those. And I also think, and I wanted to add this to kind of what you were talking about, things that we haven't seen, right, because he was injured all of last year. I think being out last year could have really helped him from a mental side of the game. You talked about being 4 gaps in the wrong place, right, or just flying around with your hair on fire and things of that nature. I think being able to take a step back, forcibly so. I mean, he didn't have a choice, but taking a step back, seeing the game from the sideline as a former starter, right? I mean, but being in the room, being on the sidelines, watching film for a whole year, I think that's going to be huge to his maturity level. I think it's going to be huge to his maturation process on the field as well. So I think that's going to be good for him. Now, I would have loved to see him on the field last year, mistakes and all, but I think being out benefited him greatly, and we're going to see it this year. And I will also speak to the fact that my biggest question mark, and I will echo what you said, is how many snaps a game is he going to be effective? What is that number? And I think that's something the coaching staff is going to have to figure out, to be honest with you. Where's that sweet spot for Marist, right?
For all the linebackers. I think that's going to be the challenge.
And I think that's a good point, because we talked about this the other day, the depth or it was Ryan and I, when we were talking about the position groups, right? We were talking about linebackers, and we talked about the depth and how deep this linebacking core is for the first time in a while, frankly. And so the coaches are going to have options, and they're going to be able to find those sweet spots for guys as far as plays and series and all of those different things. And I don't want to spoil it or anything, but one of my honorable mention guys was Prince Collie. And I think he's going to get an opportunity behind Marist once they find that sweet spot. And you're not going to see a whole lot of drop-off.
Honestly, the presence of guys like Prince Collie and Bo Bauer and Jalen Sneed and Nolan Ziegler and Junior Tuihalamaka and players like that, Jordan Patelho, is why I didn't even consider another linebacker on this list. Simply because standpoint is, will any, like, for example, I think Jack Kaiser is going to be a better player this year than he was last year. He was a solid player last year.
Right.
And he was the only guy at linebacker that really did make any game-changing plays. I mean, his pick six against Wisconsin put that game away. You know, I mean, the second pick six was more about Isaiah Foskey, and he was just kind of there. But, you know, Jack made some plays last year.
Sure.
But the thing about him is he going to play enough because of the different type of nickel looks they're going to show with a fifth DB, rotating with other players, whether it's Jordan Patelho or Jalen Sneed or somebody else. You know, is he going to play enough to have the jump in production to be considered a breakout? You know, can JD Bertrand, is he going to play enough at Mike, even if he's the starter, to improve on the production he had last year if he's rotating with Bo and Junior Tuihalamaka, right?
That's going to be tough.
And so Marist is the easy one to put because he didn't play last year and he only had 22 tackles the year before.
Right.
But that would be the only thing that kind of keeps me from, you know, was he really going to have that, like I said, that other production is how much he's going to play. And not just because of his volume, but also because you have a lot of other guys you want to play. But I have a feeling that Marist Liufau is going to be the one linebacker that they just have a hard time taking off the field. That's kind of my thought on him
you're right. You're absolutely right. But it's going to make it, I think it's going to make it easier to get him off the field at times because of Prince Kollie. I think he's going to be one heck of a backup, and he's going to force his way on the field, not as a starter. And I don't expect him to be a starter, but I expect him to force his way on the field. You know what I mean? Just like last year in fall camp, we were watching Marist make all these plays, but JD was right behind him, making a ton of plays. We're like, okay, he's going to force his way on the field, and he's going to be really good. Now, he ended up having to start and led the team in tackles, right? And so that's why I brought up this question from Call Me Ty. I think it fits right in with what we're talking about, Brian. He says, another question, does the will position leave him in spots to make these plays? We've seen it at Rover in the past.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We only saw it Rover in the past because of a dude named Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah.
Right.
It's not, I'm not saying that to be disrespectful. I'm just saying, like, he got a level of production out of that Rover position that's unique and rare.
Exactly.
He just was a special player. But if you look at last year, for example, you don't have a Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah at Rover, and all of a sudden that production is more normal for that position. You know, again, Jack Kaiser did some good things last year. But his production compared to Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is not nowhere in the same ballpark because there's different players and different usages. And, you know, there were times Jack wasn't on the field as part of sub packages, but Jeremiah never came off the field, right? I mean, that's the reality of it. But then you look at, okay, so then you get back to what it's normally going to look like. And guess who led the team in tackles last year? It was JD Bertrand. And as I pointed out in the show the other day with was it with you, Ryan? Yeah, Vince, when we were doing the disrespected players, you were talking about JD Bertrand was one of your disrespected players. So I went back and looked and it was like Jalen Smith, Manti Te'o, and then like Tavon Coney were like the only three guys to have more solo tackles in a year than JD Bertrand had last year.
Right.
And they were like by a couple. They were all in the 60s. He was at 63. They were all kind of like right there. It wasn't like, you know, they had 80. You know, they had like 64, 66. It was stuff like that. And so that's a position that's going to produce a lot. I mean, you look at what Osmar Bilal did in 2019 as the starting will. You know, when he had a bunch of tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 79 tackles, 10 tackles for loss as part of a rotation. You know, you look at the production that Drew Tranquill had in 2018, you know, playing that position, the impact plays that he had, you know, that season, 86 tackles, 9 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, you know, 4 pass breakups, and then also missed some time that year, you know, got hurt early against Navy, played very little against Northwestern, which tamped down what his production would have been if he had a healthy 13-game season. So, and then, of course, Jalen Smith with the 2 years he had as the playmaker. So just in most defenses, the Will or Mike is going to be more of the volume playmaker role unless you get a Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. That's just the nature of that position. So I think that's where you look at it and say, hey, that's, you know, that's so yeah, to answer your question, the will position is that, and it's because one of the other questions that Call Me Ty had, Vince, was about, you know, will he be best at pass rushing, run defense, and coverage? And my answer was yes.
Right.
You know, or, you know, because that's the whole point, right? That's the unique aspect of the will is the will more than any other position has to be utilized as a inside the box run stuffer, as a guy that can blitz off the edge and blitz through gaps from the second level. And then also as a guy that's going to be tasked with much more challenging coverage responsibilities, where the Mike is more running backs and occasionally a tight end up the seam if he's number 3. The Will at times is going to be running with wheel routes. He's going to be running with slots. He's going to be running, getting up underneath the W type receivers and plays like that. The Will has the really challenging responsibilities and coverage. The Rover does as well, but the Rover's not asked to be as much of an inside the box run defender compared to the Will. So I think the way in which that position has to be utilized and will be utilized is one of the things that I look at and say, that's why I believe that that Marist is going to be in position to have a big jump in production. And if he can be disciplined within, but that's also why the discipline is a concern, because of how much the Will is asked to do. Does the production get masked by giving up big plays? Those are the things that you have to ask yourself. But he's going to at very least be a really good player this year. Now we find out if he can be a game changer. And Vince, it sounds like from you that your prediction is you think as long as he stays healthy and that kind of thing, that he's going to break out as a game changer type of player.
No question about it. I think he's going to have, because look, JD from the exact same position led the team in tackles last year, and I think we both agree, and anybody that watched enough games, that he left tackles out on the field, right? And some of the ones that he left out,
just because his length,
because of the ones that he left out on the field, I think Marist makes those plays, right? Now, are there plays that JD made that maybe Marist? Well, okay, sure, but I just feel like there's going to be plenty of opportunities from that position. His position does not scare me away from predicting what he can do this year. It almost enhances what I think he can do this year, because the Will allows you to move around a little bit more and come off the edge and do some different things that you wouldn't be able to do at Mike, to be honest with you. So I'm excited about what Marist can be. I think he's going to be a massive breakout player. I mean, going from not even playing at all last year because of injury, granted, but to being one of the centerpieces of this defense. That's what I'm excited about.
So let's go to number 2, Vince, because we also have number 2 is a guy we have in common. And this isn't necessarily these next 4 aren't necessarily in order of like confidence level. We've got like a theme. We wanted to get Marist out of the way first, and then we have some other reasons why we have the rest positioned. Another guy that we both had on our list is Riley Mills. Now, obviously, Riley last year was a key rotation player as an interior guy. We predicted he's going to be the starting big end this year, while also playing some inside at times as well, which we saw in the spring game. Vince, we both have him as a breakout player. Again, we're going to have a similar conversation with Riley that we did with Marist. He's going to go from a rotation player that had some decent numbers, right? And I compared him. If you look at like his year 2 production and compare that to like Jerry Tillery's, and you compare that to Jason Ademiola and guys like that, his year 2 production was pretty good compared to those guys. And so does he kind of take that next step? So Riley last year had 16 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and 3 sacks. If you look at year 2 for Jason Ademiola, it was 25 tackles on more snaps, 4 tackles for loss, no sacks. If you look at Jerry Tillery's sophomore year, he had 37 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and 3 sacks. Riley had 3 sacks in his sophomore year. Jason Ademiola and Riley and Jerry Tillery combined for 0. And neither of them had, just the pass rushing impact that he brought to the table. Now, Jason was very disruptive as a sophomore in 2019. Again, 4 tackles for loss. Riley brought more of a pass rushing element to the table, which is why I really like him more as the big end, Vince, because Myron Tungvalo was a really good run defender for Notre Dame last year as a big end, but he didn't bring a ton as a pass rusher.
Right.
Adetokunbo Ogundeji had some moments as a pass rusher. Khalid Kareem was a more consistent clutch pass rusher. Even though sack numbers were never great, Khalid was a good pass rusher. It's just usually he was sending people his pass rushes were pushing the quarterback into the arms of someone else. I think we're going to see arguably the best big end set pass rush production this year as a unit that we've seen really since you probably have to go back to Stephon when Stephon Tuitt was here. Yeah. And it's not just Riley Mills. It's going to be others. I think we're going to see Justin Ademiola in that role at times. I think we're going to see Alexander Ahrensberger in that role at times as a pass rusher. I think Nana's probably more of a run defender, but he's had some moments where he's flashed some ability to get around the edge with his power. So as a whole, I think that position is going to be much more effective against the pass, but Riley's going to be that guy, in my opinion. Now, the question is, Vince, what kind of jump does he make?
Sure.
I really think as long as he's healthy with everything that I've heard, I think Riley Mills is going to be a really good football player for Notre Dame this year.
Yeah, I'm not, obviously, I can't predict everybody is going to be what I think Marist Liufau is going to be. That's not where I'm going with
that. Would turn this into a Homer show.
Right, and that is nowhere near where I want
Isaiah Foskey is going to be the 6th best player on this football team.
Yeah, right. I am of the belief that Riley Mills is going to turn into a solid, dependable starter whose sack numbers are going to go up. I don't think it's a stretch when you say that this is going to be the best pass rushing defensive line that Notre Dame has seen in a while. I think I would also say that it's going to be the best pass rushing duo tandem from the big end position. Mm-hmm. I think him and Justin, I think is going to go back and forth. I was thinking of him as a big end, but I think they're going to get a lot more production out of the big end from a pass rush scenario than they have over the past 5 seasons, 5, 6 seasons. Right?
I think the only group that can maybe contend with it, you look at that 18 group that had Aquara on one side, you had Khalid Kareem, plus you had Dalen and Adetokunbo Ogundeji coming off the bench as well. And but that group combined for 12 and a half, 14 and a half, 16 sacks.
As a whole defensive line?
No, just the edge players.
Oh, just the edge players. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Isaiah Foskey by himself is going to get kind of close to that.
Right? I was going to say they're going to blow that out of the water.
Right. Just last year, this is we're trying to put the pass rush and production into perspective, right? Sure. Last year, I just said that Khalid Kareem, Julian Aquara, Dalen Hayes, and Adetokunbo Ogundeji combined for 16 sacks together in a year where we all thought Notre Dame had one of the 5 best defensive lines in the country and was a primary driver of them going 12-0. Last year, Isaiah Foskey and Justin Ademiola alone combined for 16 sacks.
Right.
And then you throw 3 from Riley Mills. You've got 2 from Myron, 2 from Nana, 1 from Alexander Ahrensberger. You're over 20 sacks. What Vince and I believe is that we're going to see more of that this year from the edges. And for 2 reasons. One is I think they're all a year older and better.
Yeah.
It's not a coincidence that Riley Mills and his 3 sacks last year, 2 of them came in the Virginia game when he was playing big end because Myron was out with an illness. It's not a coincidence. The other part of it too, Vince, is I think going back to the first point, the upped production, because I think J.D. Bertrand is going to be a better blitzer as a Mike than he was a Will. I think he's going to be a better blitzer than Drew White was. I think Drew White's going to do some other things better, but I think as a blitzer, I think J.D. is going to be more effective as a Mike blitzer. Obviously, Bo Bauer has proven to be a decent blitzer when used there. I think there's going to be a jump in production at the Will position where he's going to come screaming through on some blitzes, which is then going to spin the quarterbacks out into the edge players, as opposed to in the past, it's been the other way around. And so I think those things factor into it. But I really have confidence that Riley Mills is going to come out this year and double his sack total at least, and be a guy that's just a really good, strong player. He's going to have to become a little bit more consistent from at times his leverage gets a little high. He was a young player. The technique wasn't always consistently there. He had a good start to the spring, but it wasn't great, but he had a great finish to the spring from what we heard. And what that tells me is he really took well to Al Washington's coaching.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's also part of it, is I think that he needed a little bit more of an advanced repertoire. And I think we're going to see that from him. And again, I think the sack production is from him is going to be there. And I think that he's a guy that's going to have at least 5-6 sacks this season, which again, that's not huge numbers, but again, the way that they run this defense, a lot of times on third down, he might not even be on the field,
right? Unless
they move him inside with Jason and put Justin on the outside with Foskey. We could see something like that as well. And then he's rushing as an inside guy on third down.
It's more of a speed package or NASCAR, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So I think he's going to be a difference maker. And I think that unique combination of him and I think Foskey, and I think the trio of Foskey and Mills and Justin Ademiola is going to be Notre Dame's best pass rushing group in a long time. To your point, Vince, I think just the numbers are going to be excellent. You'd have to go back and look at that 2012 group of Tuitt, Shimbo, and Cap. which combined for 24 and a half sacks, just the three of them. And they technically were all edge players. Prince was an outside linebacker. Cap and Stephon were both ends. Yeah. But I'll be shocked if this group, that trio, doesn't surpass that group.
Mm-hmm. No, I don't. And I hate to say it like this because that group has some names and they're playing in the NFL and all of those different things, but I don't think it's going to be all that close.
Yeah.
To be honest.
That's a lot of sacks. I mean, that's a lot of sacks. I think it'll be close.
Yeah.
I just think because also that defense, in fairness, was not a defense that was really turned loose. It was a 3-4 read and react, 2-gapping defense. I think it's impressive that they had as many sacks as they did. It just shows how good they were, especially the 6 from Cap, because he definitely wasn't put in pass rushing mode. But I think this group has a chance, and I think Riley's going to be a big part. And it's important that he has to be that guy too, Vince, because if you can't take some pressure off of Isaiah Foskey, then it's going to be a lot easier for teams to double team. Because I'll tell you this, like first couple games of the year against Ohio State and Marshall and Cal, they're going to look at 99 and say, that's the guy we're least worried about.
Yep. And
we got to make sure 7 and 57 don't beat us. And that's going to be the key. And now oftentimes you're going to see 7 and 57. That's Isaiah Foskey and Justin Ademiola together, because normally Notre Dame is an underfront. Underfront means the 3 technique is the same side as the Viper. Now, one thing that I noticed in the blue gold game, Vince, is I saw a lot more overfronts in that game. Now, what I don't know if that was just them staying in their under alignment and then bumping guys over, so then the nose maybe bumps out, or if they actually flip, which teams normally do on an over and under front. I didn't study it enough to know that, but I did see some overfronts in that game. That could get interesting, because if you got Jason on one side and Isaiah on the other, now all of a sudden you're looking at some really interesting protection issues for teams. But I think that's the thing, is he's going to have to step up early in the year, just from a practical standpoint, Vince, and show that he's capable of really leading that position group into the production that we think it can have and needs to have, to be completely honest with you.
Okay, so the third young man that we are going to talk about is actually on your list. So I'm going to let you take this one.
Well, these next two is when we're going to we have some differences of our predictions for breakouts. Not differences like we disagree with each other. We just had other guys over those. And mine is Jason Ademiola, and we won't talk about this too much because we talked a lot about him last week. And where he falls into the breakout is I think he was a good player for Notre Dame. Statistically, he did some good things, but he didn't necessarily have like the monster production. I think we're going to see a lot more production from Jason. I'm shocked at the lack of respect he's getting in some of the different NFL draft stuff we're reading and hearing. He's getting mentioned as a key player for the defensive line in like the preseason magazines, but then he's not ranked in like the top 15, 20 defensive tackles type of thing. I think by the end of the year, he's going to be considered one of the 10 best defensive tackles in college football. And I think he's kind of ticked off from what I'm hearing, and he's recognizing the lack of respect that he's getting. But he's really I think he's poised for a breakout year.
Yeah, I mean we've obviously talked about Jason an awful lot, and I think that's probably why I didn't put him on my list, because I feel like he's already a breakout guy. But when you have them in the Disrespected show that we did, and we both had him on our list, then he's going to break out for everybody else, basically. Right. Not for us, but he's going to break out for everybody else. That's a good one to have on your list. I agree with it. I think he's going to be super special. And when you talk about people's defensive or offensive game plans and who they have to focus on, if he's not on your list, you're not doing your job right.
And that's partly why I don't think he's on your list, because I think you kind of already view him as that kind of guy.
That's exactly right.
Impact. I'm looking at it from a production and a perception standpoint.
Right.
I understand why he's not on your list. I'm looking at it a different way, which is why we do it this way, because we can look at it different ways.
Absolutely.
But like I said, we don't need to talk a lot about him, because we have talked a lot about him,
and we will continue to, because he's that good.
Right. So let's focus on another play we haven't talked a lot about this offseason. And that is your number 3 guy, Vince. Now we're going to go to the back end of the defense for this one. So we're going to get away from the front 7 a little bit and talk a little bit about the secondary. For your next 2 picks are going to be secondary guys. So let's start off with Ramon Henderson.
Yeah, Ramon Henderson is on my list because I think he is – I don't want to say he's forgotten, because I think a lot of people pencil him in as the starter across from Brandon Joseph at safety. I do think that is the case. But nationally, I don't think anybody knows who Ramon Henderson is. And that's understandable because at the beginning of last season, he wasn't even a safety. and he was getting burned as a corner. And it was kind of ugly, to be honest with you. And I give a lot of credit to the Notre Dame defensive staff to recognize that and move him to safety where he's clearly more comfortable at safety. He was starting to make plays at safety. I've got him as the tier of rotational to solid starter. That's kind of where I have him as far as a breakout player is concerned. I think he's going to start. I think he's going to be a very dependable starter across from Brandon Joseph because, again, teams are going to go away from Brandon Joseph. He's going to be a guy that's circled on their offensive game plan, and he should be. He's an All-American, right? And so Ramon Henderson's going to get tested, and I think he's going to come through. I think he's going to be really good. I think that I'm very interested to see how Notre Dame uses their safeties against Ohio State.
Yeah.
Okay. Are they going to use Ramon as a bracket safety, over Smith Njigba, or however you say his last name? I apologize for butchering
Smith and Njigba.
Njigba, thank you. I'm interested to see how that goes, or do they not trust him enough and they put Brandon Joseph over there? You know what I mean? I think Ramon Henderson is going to have an opportunity to have a breakout year. I really do. I'm excited to see him play. I like when he comes downhill to hit somebody. I like what he does in coverage. I think he's so much more comfortable there. And if you don't have confidence in the secondary, you are not going to be successful. He lacked confidence as a corner. He gained his confidence as a safety. And I think that is going to only bear fruit for him as the safety opposite Brandon Joseph, opposite an All-American, right? So I think Ramon Henderson is going to do some really, really good things this year.
I have to say how impressed I am that you stayed on point while you watched me assassinate that fly during your talking point.
I almost lost it.
That was really impressive. Because I know you knew what I was doing. So that was incredibly impressive, Vince. Like you just steamrolled right through it, man. That was very well done.
Thank you. I have a lot of things to say about Ramon Henderson. So
I heard everything you said about Ramon. You did a great job. I was able to lock in as I was plotting the assassination of this fly. So for me, Vince, I have to see him. Like you talked about how you think he's going to be a good role player. I kind of feel like that's already what he was the second half of last year. For me to consider him a breakout, he needs to become a playmaker. We saw flashes of it. Like we saw that, like the Virginia game, he had a couple really big plays. Was that the game? He had a pick in that game too, right? And he came off the edge. Remember that blitz he had coming off the edge just blew the running back up? Like I think Ramon has that potential. I try not to get too worked up about spring games. He just didn't look great in the spring game. We didn't hear a lot about him from the spring. So I think he's in a unique situation because he went from, okay, I'm learning a new position and I just got kind of comfortable with it. And now we're changing our coverage schemes.
Yeah, good point.
So I think that put him behind a little bit in the spring, but he also showed that he's kind of a quick study because he went from being a corner to a safety and played decent football.
Yeah.
So I think for him to be a breakout, in my view, I think he needs to be a more of a playmaker, like a guy that's like he's clearly your number two guy, and he's a guy that you look at and say, well, that guy's going to have 60 plus tackles and 2-3 picks and 4 or 5 tackles for loss and a really good player. I think the tools are there.
I think they're
long, athletic, and all. Yeah. He can hit. The tools are all there. He just got to show it. I like that he's on your list though, because if you are right and he is a breakout player this year, this Notre Dame secondary is going to be really good.
Yeah,
because they already have one great safety. Like somebody asked if Brandon Joseph be considered a breakout player, and I was like, no, he was an All-American.
All-American. You can't really break out.
He's a consensus All-American. There's no other breakout unless I think he's going to be like the greatest safety ever. It's not really a breakout for him.
That's why he's not on my list.
Right. We'll have some interesting comments about Cam Hart at the end, but he's at least going to be a good player like he was last year. If Ramon is a breakout player, Vince, and you talked about him third, and like I said, this was an order of prediction. We talked about him third, but he could be a guy that if he breaks out could have a really big impact on this defense.
No question.
Because now you have 2 really good playmaking safeties. Now the position group that's considered your question mark in most circles, Notre Dame circles, is now all of a sudden got 2 legit playmakers at safety. that would be big time for this defense. I'm just not ready to go there with him yet. But if you're right, it's going to have a huge impact on this defense.
And I think that the offseason is going to be huge for him. I really do, from a strength standpoint, from an athleticism standpoint, from a learning the position standpoint, like you mentioned, new coverages and things like that. Just when he got comfortable moving from corner to safety in the middle of the season and getting comfortable with what that was. Well, now they're changing it all. I think this, the spring is one thing. I think he was just kind of scratching the surface when the spring game rolled around. This offseason is going to be huge for him. And I think he's going to have the opportunity to break out as that second safety once the season actually starts. And look, when we talk about secondary, when we talk about defense, they're going to be tested out of the gate, obviously. And so it's going to be a bit of a trial by fire with him at safety if he does end up locking down that spot across from Brandon Joseph. And so I see the flashes. I see the tools. I see the work ethic, which I think is really, really important here. And I'm really excited about what he can be. That's for sure.
Let's go to number 4, Vince. We'll just we'll kind of snake it a little bit just because I think it's an easy it's a smooth transition to your number 4 guy because we're staying at the same position group. That's the one where you need breakouts to happen more than any. Your number 4 guy is one of my favorite players, Ryan Barnes.
Absolutely.
Why do you have Ryan Barnes as a breakout player?
I have, I think I've told this story before, but when you and I were at, I want to say it was a spring practice, maybe. It was the one spring practice that we got to go to before COVID hit, right, in 2020. And I was like, who is that guy? And you're like, dude, that's Ryan Barnes. I'm like, okay, he checks all the boxes physically. You know what I mean? And he was an early enrollee, I believe, at that point as a freshman, right? And he looked like a college football player at that point, right? Well, now we are 2 years removed from that,
right? And
it's only gotten better from a physical standpoint. The problem was there were people in the way. Okay, that's the best way I could put it. He was kind of buried a little bit on the depth chart, and for whatever reason, the coaching staff didn't necessarily trust some of these younger guys. I was hoping he was going to get some playing time,
especially since he missed his senior year of high school.
Right. That's a good point. I was really hoping that he was going to get some time last fall, and he didn't. He didn't really get any time last fall. I think he may have gotten a little bit of mop-up time, that kind of a thing, but that doesn't count for me. I was hoping he was going to get some legit time. I think this offseason, this spring, is a great opportunity for him to show what he's got and force his way onto the field. He's long, he's athletic. He checks all those boxes that you want from the physical side of what a corner is in the modern game, right? A lot of times in the past, 20 years ago, he's a wide receiver. You know what I mean? Because they don't necessarily have big, long, lanky corners, and that's who this guy is. And I love what he brings to the table from a physical standpoint. I'm hoping that 2 years has enabled him to get the mental side of things down and that he's poised and ready to take a spot. I had him as like a no play to a rotational player, but I would not in any way be surprised if he ends up as a starter by the end of the season. I really wouldn't. I think he's going to be in the rotation. I think he's going to be a very key part of the rotation. I think he could be a starter by the end of the season. I'm not quite ready to go there yet, but I think he's going to be really important to what this team wants to do defensively.
I hope you're right. I'm very high on Ryan Barnes. Big fan. I think he's a guy that could really help solidify this cornerback rotation, even if it's not as a full-time starter, just as a guy that can, play the role that Tariq Bracy played at times last year. That not the nickel role, but, Tariq was the number. I mean, there was times when he was in there and Cam Hart wasn't, and times he was in there and Tariq and Clarence Lewis wasn't on the outside. So I think that's definitely a role that I would hope that he would earn. My number 4 guy is Howard Cross. Now, Howard Cross falls in the category of rotation player to really, good starter, not a difference maker. But I think that position is very important in this defense. And one thing I don't think we have ever given enough credit to is the important role that Kurt Hinish played the last couple seasons. Now, he was never a high-volume playmaker. He was never a difference maker. He was never like this super disruptive guy, but he was really steady right up the middle.
Yeah.
I think Howard Cross that's a very important position, because if your nose tackle is not playing good football, you're going to get run on. I don't care what you have everywhere else. I think Howard Cross is my breakout because he brings such a different element to the table than Kurt Hinish. Like, Kurt was a tough, like, street, want to fight you in a back alley kind of kid.
Yeah.
Howard Cross is more of an athletic, quick, disruptive playmaker with great hands and long arms. And so, to me, I think that we're going to see the nose tackle role be used a little bit differently this year when he's in the game. And I think he's going to provide, and he did it last year in limited time. I think he's going to provide even more production this year, because I think he's probably going to probably come close to doubling his snaps this season. This coaching staff loves this kid, and the previous coach loved him. And I'm like, well, we're going to see if this is because Elston had like a man crush from recruiting and loved the kid and the family and all that.
Right.
And how will the new coach feel? And the same thing. They love the kid. They think he's a playmaker. And the only question we have is, because he's 265, 270, can he hold up for 40 snaps a game? Right. That's the question.
Yeah.
He's definitely going to play more than he played last year. But I think Howard Cross is a guy that's going to be he's going to be the new, why don't you ever talk about this guy, but you should player.
Sure. Yeah.
For us.
Absolutely. Yes.
Where we can't talk about everybody, and Foskey had 2 sacks, and so had a pick, and Marist had, this big play, and this guy had that play, and Jack Kaiser had this great tackle on third. But you're like, we never talk about Howard Cross. But then if you break down the game, you're like, man, look at that, look at that, look at that, look at that, and he's just that glue guy, right? And I think that's important. But I think the fact that he's going to provide more disruptive production, in my opinion, my prediction, is why he's on this list.
Okay.
So he's going to see a big jump in. I mean, he's going to go from backup rotation guy to starter, in my opinion, right? He's going to go from, 15 to 18 snaps on average a game to at least 30 to 35 a game. And I think his production is going to see a big jump. And I think that production is going to be something, Vince, that this defense really is going to benefit from. And when you look at his numbers last year, like, I was surprised at the end of the year when I saw Howard Cross's numbers.
Right.
Because I'm like, I don't remember him making, like, I think I have a pretty good memory. I think I can recall, like, oh yeah, this play on this situation. And I honestly cannot remember a single tackle for loss or sack that Howard Cross had last year. But he had 4.5 tackles for loss and 3 sacks. And it's like, why? Because he is. He's not flash. He's not sexy. And he played 330 snaps last year. So it's like, and a lot of those snaps came during that period when Kurt Hinish was injured.
Right.
And so he got a lot more snaps during that period of time. So he played like 36 early, 32, 43, 54, 35, and he was okay at the beginning of the season. But then he was 12, 23, 20, 16, 19, right. 24, 16. And that's when you saw his production really take a jump. So like this is according to Pro Football Focus, which, as we've told you, their grades stink, but their data collection is good. The first 6 games of the year, he played, way over half his snaps. In the first 5 games, he played, I'm just doing like 68. It's like 150. He played over half his snaps in the first 5 games. He had 3 stops, 3 run stops. He had 8 pressures, right? And if you look at the last half of the year, he played far fewer snaps, but he had 9 run stops during that stretch and fewer snaps, because playing less allowed him to be quicker and more athletic and disruptive. Yeah. So my question is, can he give the volume that we saw earlier in the year with more production? That's the question that I have.
Yeah.
I think he will.
Sure.
And I think that jump in production is going to be something that this is going to make this defensive line really tough, because you're going to now potentially have 4 players that can be disruptors. Kurt Hinish had like 1 year, 2020, he was disruptive that year at times. All the other years, he just was a dirty work, do your job, blue collar, like loved to fight. He was their scrapper. Now you're going to have lineups when you have Mills, Foskey, Ademiola, either one, Justin at end or Mills, Jason at 3 technique, and then Howard Cross. Now all of a sudden you're going to have 4 guys can be disruptive.
Right.
I almost cheated, Vince. I almost cheated.
Not you.
I know, right? I almost cheated and went with him and Jacob Lacey.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I really did, because I think at the end of the day, it's going to be the combination of the two.
Yep.
The reason I went with Cross is because I think Jacob's going to be more in the Kurt Hinish role, where the production's not going to jump at you as much as Howard Cross's production is going to jump at you. But I think their unique combination of styles is why that duo, I think, is going to be really good at nose tackle this year.
Well,
I think Cross is going to have the more sexy, flashy plays and numbers, but that duo as a whole. So I'm kind of cheating, but I didn't. I went with Howard Cross, but I think at the end of the year, if we're talking about, like, it wasn't Howard, it wasn't Jacob, it was the two of them together made that nose tackle position really good.
Well, it's funny you say that, because you basically took the reason that I left Cross off of my list, because I almost interchanged Cross with Lacey at this point, and I couldn't pick between the two of them, so I left them both off, but they both made my honorable mention list because of everything you just said. Like, they don't strike me as they're going to be super important to what this defense needs to do, because where do you need to be the best? You need to be the best up the middle. Like that's where they need to be really good. But I just didn't see either, because I couldn't differentiate the two. And I think that's a really good point that you make. We were kind of on the same wavelength on that one, and that's why they both made my honorable mention list. Still very, very important. But yeah, I was that's why I was just hesitant to put them on my list. But you make really good points. I'm excited about those guys.
It's very fair. Yeah. It's very fair. Let's go our number 5 guy, Vince. You and I have the same player, number 5.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason we went him 5th is because the conversation about him is a little bit more interesting, and that is Cam Hart. Now, here's the interesting, because Cam was pretty good last year. I mean, we had this conversation last week, Vince, where we kind of compared his numbers to Julian Love, like what he allowed, the production he allowed. He allowed significantly fewer catches than what Julian Love had done in his second year as a starter, and even allowed fewer catches and yards than what Julian Love allowed in his consensus All-American season. And so we kind of talked about maybe some of the reasons why. And of course, Cam was an inconsistent player at times last year, just because, again, first year in the starting lineup, still learning it to be a converted wide receiver. But when he was on, he was really good.
Yeah.
So I was a little hesitant to put him on this list because he was already a pretty good player.
Mm-hmm.
I think the reason he's on this list, though, Vince, is you and I believe that he's going to go from good player to, by the end of the year, we're talking about him as being one of the best cornerbacks in the country.
Yep.
That's the reason ultimately we decided to put Cam Hart on this list. And, of course, we had to talk about him because I can't do a show on breakout players if we don't talk about the kid that Vince is the president of his fan club. Right. So that's the other reason we had to talk about Cam Hart.
Of course. And look, he's going to go from steady starter to
at times really good, right?
But to star, and that's the category 1 that I wrote down, right? It's good to great, essentially, and I think that he has every opportunity. And this is a projection show, so we obviously are projecting, but we're projecting him to be really, really good. Mm-hmm. And again, he's going to get tested. I think that there's going to be offensive coordinators out there that are going to say, okay, we hear the hype, let's see it. And I welcome it. I'm excited about that. I want people to see how good Cam can be. And I think this offseason, last season was huge for him. Being a starter, being someone that they're counting on, and he was a first-time starter, right? I mean, he kind of went from nothing to steady starter to now he's had that season. He's understood what that's about. Now he takes this offseason, he puts this defense, this secondary on his back, on his shoulders, and he takes that to another level. I think that's kind of the maturation process of really, really, really good players. You get that first season of starting under your belt where, okay, you're counted on and there's good things that you do, and but you're steady but then you parlay that into the offseason. You parlay and remember, he didn't really get a spring because he was injured. And so he didn't really have that opportunity. So more time in the film room, more time in the weight room, all of those different things. And then he goes into the offseason. He's going to be considered one of the leaders. And now he has that opportunity because he could have come out last year. I believe Ryan had that intel about his grade that he got from the NFL draft process. And that was a second, third round grade, right?
By some.
After last year, right? And he only has a chance to build on that. And he could be a day one player. He could be a first round player if he goes out and has the kind of season that I think his projection is leading him to. All jokes aside, I'm just really, really excited to watch what Cam Hart does this year. And I agree with you. I think he could be one of the best corners in the country when it's all said and done.
So for me, I think the first part is where's he going to play? Is they going to keep him at the field? They're going to keep him in the boundary? Are they going to start going left, right? I'm curious about that.
Yeah.
Do they use him to match up a little bit this year? Are they comfortable with that? So, it could be like there was a discussion in the chat about, how Ohio State defends Jackson Smith and Jigba. There's two schools of thought. One is you put your best corner on their best receiver, right? So you put, Cam Hart's going to go where Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to go.
Yeah.
Or you could do what I always like to do, which is put your best corner on their number 2 receiver, take him out, and then double team and really rotate your coverages to that guy. Because I think what I kind of view it as, or you say, hey, look, you're just going to leave him at the field and go about it that way. So I think there's a lot of different ways you could go about that, and how they use him is going to have an impact on his production this year. But I think either way, you're talking about a guy that is going to be a difference maker, however he's used. And I think the fact that he can play boundary and field is something that does give you some flexibility if you so choose to do so. I also think we're going to see Notre Dame play a little bit more zone this year.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to benefit Cam from a production standpoint. I think you're going to see him getting more tackles for loss in the screen game. I think you're going to see him getting more breakups because he'll be able to drive on the football. Because against Wisconsin, because they were such a heavy run play action team, Notre Dame played a little bit more zone from what I could tell. And guess what? That was Cam's most productive game, right? Because they were putting an extra safety in the box, really playing the run, and your corners are kind of playing over the top and things like that. And Cam has a huge game, which I don't think is a coincidence.
Right, exactly.
So I think that's going to help him as well too. I think his technique is refined. And here's another thing. I was talking to, and I think we've talked about this on the show, and I was talking to somebody that's connected to Cam, but not like a family member of Cam's, right? It's not like a family member of Cam's or a friend of Cam's, something like that, but somebody that was kind of around him this summer when he was working out. And apparently, like, Cam has just, he's always been kind of a quiet, sort of laid back kind of kid, friendly. The kids like him, but he wasn't like he wasn't just like a, and apparently this summer, between the period between when school ended and when they kind of came back, he was down south training, and some of the people that were training with him were like, this kid, I don't know this dude. I don't know who this kid is. like this guy is a monster. Like, this guy's hungry. This guy's getting in your face saying, let's go work out. And that's kind of that thing where Cam kind of got a taste of, you know what? I can be really good, and I want to be really good, and I want to do the work to be really good, and he's putting that work in.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's what gives me a little bit more optimism about – it's like there's this really negative optimism about the secondary, and I get why. I watched the bowl game too.
Sure, yeah, right.
You know what I mean? But I think we kind of have to take that we have to kind of take that a little – look, there was a lot of reasons why. I don't want to rehash them and make excuses, but that wasn't the product we saw for 12 games before that. We saw one position have similar issues all year, but never even to that degree it wasn't as bad. But you're going to you have an All-American safety on one side. You have another potential All-American player at corner. We have a breakout guy at safety, and then a lot of people in the chat were asking why he was the safety that we picked as a breakout.
Yeah.
We had a super chat from Sean S. who said, can Xavier Watts become on defense what you thought he could be at receiver level of impact wise? We had other people down here. I wanted to kind of to bring up Brandon Plesner. I want to see Xavier Watts break out at safety. I think he has more talent and a higher upside than Henderson. I think there's merit to that conversation. 99 problems became one. Where's Xavier Watts in his development? Everyone's excited about him, but he seems to have faded as Ramon Henderson has ascended. Does he still have some dude potential? Because we've talked a lot about him.
Absolutely.
So the point is there's a lot of guys, Vince, that you say, it's not just one guy. If this guy breaks out, they're good. If he doesn't, they're screwed. There's other guys that could be that player at those positions. So I think the secondary is going to be a little better than people think. I don't know if it's going to necessarily be great because the other cornerback position is still a big question mark at this point in time. But when you have two potential like dudes in your secondary, you're not going to have a bad secondary.
Right, exactly.
And that's the thing is I think this is going to be still a pretty good secondary. And if I remember correctly from the spring, they were doing a lot of left and right with their safeties, but they were starting with Brandon Joseph as the boundary, if I remember correctly, which meant you've got Brandon on one side and Cam on the other. So it's not like you're putting them on one side and then good luck on that other side. You know, they're playing on opposite sides. And so I think that is a reason why I look at it and say, I think that this secondary could be better than we think. Because if Cam Hart's the breakout player that we both think he will be,
right,
you've got two All-American caliber players in your secondary.
Correct.
You're not going to suck in the secondary if that's the case.
And I like you said, I picked another safety to be a breakout player, and that's just a solid starter. And if they can find a solid starter at the other corner, they're going to be in great shape. If you have two All-American caliber players and two solid starters, that's a really good secondary. So, yeah, I'm excited about what this secondary can be. And I also agree that it's one of the biggest question marks on the team. But that is saying something considering how high we are on the defensive line and the linebacking core. So just because they're the biggest question mark doesn't mean that they're a liability either. So people have to understand that the linebacking core and the defensive line are going to be really good. So if the secondary is the biggest question mark and they have an All-American that's already there and a guy who we think could be an All-American, I think this defense is going to be pretty decent.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it was pretty good last year. But that's what we do, right? Recency bias is a real thing. We all deal with it. Right. And I get it. But what we saw in the bowl game is not what we saw all year. For example, Notre Dame's defense played pretty bad against Oklahoma State. Well, Ohio State gave up 45 points to Utah. Do we really think that they're going to go out and give up 45 points every game? No. That bowl games are a different animal. I just don't put a lot in it. But I also think that doesn't mean we dismiss the fact that there were the issues that they had. And it was also a completely different coaching staff, as we've discussed it before in the past. Who were some of the other guys, Vince, that you had a hard time keeping off of this?
Yeah.
We said Justin Ademiola is one. So we just decided to move him to another show. Right. So, I mean, he could have easily been on this conversation. That was one. Right. Who are some other guys that we had on the list?
Alexander Ahrensberger was one.
Yeah.
I think he has the potential to be a guy who would fall in the third category for me, like a no-play-ish type kid to a solid rotation player. And I think he could be that guy. So he's one guy that I had on there. So he made honorable mention for me. I already mentioned Cross and Lacey. And then I also already mentioned Prince Collie. I think he's going to have an opportunity to really make a name for himself. Because remember, we were talking about him as the next coming of linebackers before they signed this 4-man linebacking crew that's now true freshman. And I still think he can be a very, very important piece of this defense. And again, not to rehash what we already talked about, but if Marist can't be an 80-snap guy, a 70-snap guy, well, which is okay. Sure. You've got a pretty good backup coming in Prince Collie, who's going to take over that position as well. They're going to play it differently, but I think they're both going to get a lot of production out of that will linebacker position. So those are the guys I kind of had on my honorable mention. So Justin, Ahrensberger, Cross, Lacey, and Collie.
Well, Justin wasn't on your honorable mention. In full disclosure, he was on Vince's list of 5 guys. He was bought. So I just want to make sure people don't think that you didn't have him among your top 5. He was a guy that was discussed as should we discuss him, and we're like, yeah, he's in the list, but we're going to talk about him again in another show. I like those. Obviously, Lacey, like I said, I had a hard time not putting in this list. So he obviously would be an honorable mention guy for me, just as part of that rotation with Howard Cross. I think a guy that could end up making us look bad for not having him on this list at the end of the year is Jack Kaiser. I do. I think year 2 in the starting lineup, if the pass rush is improved, like if Marist is getting pressures, then who's going to benefit from that? It's the guy that linebacker on the opposite side, because you usually throw it kind of away from the blitz. You know, Jack's going to be there. I think he had a solid first year. I think depending on how they use him and how they structure their coverages, I think he could be a guy that makes a lot of plays this year. But I when I look, I think he's a guy that could be on this list, Vince. Here's another guy, Vince, that I want to ask you about. So here's a guy that I think has a chance to break out that's going to create some uproar.
Okay.
And this isn't my prediction. This is what I'm hearing from some people. Guy that had a really good spring, finished the spring off very well, and is working like a dog this offseason. Clarence Lewis. I think we all just assume he sucks and he's going to suck and he's not going to get any better. And the thing that I've said is I liked Clarence coming out of high school. Yeah. I gave him a 3.5-star grade and a 4-star upside. That's not the kind of guy that should be starting as a true freshman or even as a true sophomore. I think Clarence was thrust into the lineup earlier than expected. If Notre Dame's recruiting hadn't been so bad before he got here, I think Clarence would have been a guy that we didn't see much of. He'd have been a really good special teams player, maybe like a rotation guy last year, and now he's pushing for a starting job by some guy that just left for the NFL, right? Like they would have had somebody, like let's say they would have landed a Caleb Evans last year, and he would have started opposite Cam Hart. I think Clarence, we'd be looking at Clarence a little bit different because he would have been a nice role player, rotation guy, would have made some plays. Sure. They could have protected him a little bit as he continued to develop his game. Now he goes into his junior year. Now is when we expected Clarence to really start to kind of become the player he's capable of being. And I think he's a guy that could end up being that player as well. Again, that's more so of what I'm hearing. And then also just thinking about the role he was thrust in. We've seen this before where guys were forced on the field too early, didn't look good early on. I mean, Harrison Smith, anyone? You know what I mean? Like, now, again, he was in a different situation because he was playing linebacker when he should have been playing linebacker. But we've seen this before. I remember how terrible David Bruton was early in his career because he just wasn't ready to play yet. And then by his senior year, he's a pretty good football player and gets drafted and has a very, very long NFL football career. So, yeah. So I think that's kind of where I look at Clarence. Is not that he's going to be a great player, so I don't necessarily want to put him in the I'm not ready to put him in that breakout category, but I think he's going to be a better player than people think. Which perception-wise, he can end up being a breakout player. I think in a lot of ways. I think he's a guy that's being written off a little bit too easily. Now, could he get beat out this year? Yeah. Are there guys that I think have more natural ability than him? Oh, yeah. But he just strikes me as one of those dudes who's not going to – he's a Jersey kid, right, Vince? He's not going down without a fight. You're not just going to walk in and like, oh, you're pretty good. Here's my job, right? He's going to battle. He's going to compete. And I think he's a guy that could surprise some people.
No, I like that. And I think I will also say that if it's not this year, like this is it. That if he break out this year, then he'll be the
get
guy.
Passed up.
If not, yeah, exactly. If not, he's going to get passed up, and that's going to be it. So I think that the older these guys get, the more mature these guys get. They also understand that, like, okay, this is my time, this is my moment, this is my opportunity, and if I don't embrace it now, it's never going to happen again. And I'm going to be kind of that forgotten guy. So that is also a big part of the Clarence Lewis story. You know what I mean? And so I'm sure he feels that pressure, and I think he's going to use that pressure in a positive way. So we'll see how that does, because again, competition's a good thing. I want competition for that other cornerback position. I want there to be, I want it to be neck and neck. I want their guys to be fighting for that spot, because then if you win that spot, then you have won that spot. It's not going to be, well, I don't know who to put there. So you're
the
go.
vet. We'll play you.
I don't want that to be the case. I want there to be some legit competition, and I think there will be.
So, Vince, that's going to do it for this part of our show as far as the breakout players. I think it was a very interesting discussion. There's other guys we could talk about, and there's always somebody that breaks out that you maybe don't expect, and that's always part of the fun of this conversation. So let's transition into the questions, right? So we got a lot of good questions today. Let's dive into that. Want to start off with this was hilarious. So Brandon Plesner just randomly in the middle of our show says, I thought it was Tuesday and Thursday. And I'm like, what the heck are you talking about? Then he follows up and he says, that's how locked in I am to IB. Trying to text my girlfriend and accidentally put it in the chat. Well, that's how locked in Brandon is to the IB show. So that was.
I thought it was Tuesday or Thursday. I was like, what is he talking about?
Yeah, that was a great one. I do want to thank Mark. He said the fly killing speed has to be a super chat. I appreciate that very much. You don't mess with me during the show because then it's just you got to go, right? I mean, it's just time to go. You're right.
Look in your eyes, by the way, when like you were eyeballing that fly. I was like, oh, something bad's about to happen.
Oh yeah. He had to do it. It's like I hate to do it just as bad as you hate to see it done, but it's got to do it. You leave me no choice. Oscar Bravo Golf Yankee November with a super chat. Thank you for that. How much of an increase in arm strength and zip is reasonable to expect as CJ Carr develops? Also, just got my hat today. Thanks, gentlemen. You are welcome. I think I think we'll see a jump. I think CJ, Vince, you and I both saw him. He's a kid. I mean, he's a kid, right? And he's a tall 6'2.5", very talented kid, but he's physically still a kid.
Skinny. I mean, he's older for a 24 kid. I mean, I think he's
right
now.
Yeah, just turned 17 in May. Yeah.
But he needs time. I mean, he just needs he's not ready to be a starting quarterback in college, right?
He is on the same age track that I was on because I had that May, June birthday where like you turn at the end of the year. So like he'll be 17 all of his junior year, he'll be 18 all of his senior year, and then turn 19 as he's getting ready to enroll at Notre Dame. Right. That's how I was because it's just that weird birthday. And I'll tell you, I went from my jump in size and arm strength from my sophomore year in high school at the same age to senior year was significant. And I don't have the arm that CJ Carr had. I had a pretty strong arm, I would say. But my point is it'll jump. You'll see that. Will he look like John Elway by his senior year? No, but he's going to have a strong arm, and he can already power the ball down the field. I mean, he already is a more willing deep ball thrower than Dante Moore. I think part of that's the offense, but he's throws the ball downfield a lot, shows good touch. At times, as we talked about in the breakdown, he'll throw that deep ball and it'll be just slightly behind. That stuff will change as he gets stronger. So I definitely think we'll see more deep ball growth. I think his zip will improve, obviously, as he gets stronger, just natural growth. And then you kind of start talking about once he gets into a college strength program. So, I mean, arm strength is not an issue for CJ Carr. I mean, he has good arm strength now. It's going to be very good by the time he gets to college.
That's just natural growth and just natural.
Right.
He doesn't need to do anything special. He just needs to grow up a bit.
And him and Dante Moore are very similar. Neither of them are going to have like the Nico, the Malik Zaire, the bazooka for an arm, right? Like they just don't have that. But you don't necessarily need that. Brandon Wimbush had that, and he wasn't a great college quarterback. So I think they have plenty of arm talent, plenty of arm strength. And for, CJ, it's going to get even stronger. It will for Dante, but we're just talking about CJ now as well. So, yes, I think that's going to end up being a significant strength of his when you consider that he also throws with really good timing for his age. Like his timing for a sophomore is outstanding. His anticipation for a sophomore is outstanding. As the arm strength catches up to those traits, the accuracy, the ball placement, now that's why I say I don't have him as a 5-star yet. I have him as a 4.5-star, top 50 guy. He's kind of in like that 35 to 40 range for me, probably overall as a player. He's my number 2 quarterback in that class so far, but easy 5-star upside. And I think we'll see that by his junior year. I really do. Just from some of the things we saw just in the Irish Invasion, there's been a little bit of a jump in arm strength from that standpoint. Brandon K asks, how likely is it that Foskey does not lead the team in sacks? Will one of the Ademiolas pull it off since Foskey might draw more attention? You want to take that one there, Vince?
Possible. I would never say anything's not possible. He is going to get more attention. He obviously leads the team in sacks, after last year. I think that he's still going to get his. I don't see Jason leading the team in sacks just because of the position that he plays. I would be if a defensive interior lineman is leading the team in sacks, I think that's a negative for Notre Dame. I just do. From the talent that Notre Dame has on the edge, I think that's a negative. So could Justin lead the team in sacks? Yeah, it's possible, depending on the amount of playing time that he gets. Because I still think he's going to be a backup. I mean, I don't think he's going to start. So depending on his reps, how many opportunities is he going to get? I think Isaiah Foskey is going to get more opportunities than Justin is going to get. So just from that standpoint, I'm going to say that I still think Isaiah Foskey is going to lead the team in sacks. Would it shock me? No, but I think there would be extenuating circumstances that led to that being the case. If everybody's healthy the whole year, I still think it's Foskey.
How likely is it? It's unlikely. It would have to be somebody. It would have to be somebody other than the Ademiolas Yeah. I mean, it would have to be like Marist as a blitzing linebacker, as a third down pass rusher. It would have to be Riley Mills gets 9-10 sacks. It would have to be something like that. I think, like you mentioned, you made the case why it wouldn't be the Ademiola. So that's that. I agree with you on that, Vince. Brandon K also asks, where would you use Jordan Botelho? For me, unless he's a starter, I'm using him all over. I mean, I'm going to get him near the line of scrimmage on third down. I'm going to have him in like a rover role as a rotation guy in certain looks. I'm using him all over.
And we talked about that, but Ryan and I talked about that in our positional rankings and all of that. He's your Swiss Army knife. I think that's that's the value that he adds to this team is he's your Swiss Army knife. Eventually he'll get himself into a starting role. I don't know where that's going to be. Is that going to be as an edge rusher? Is that going to be as a rover? Is it going to, I don't know the answer to that question, but I think that right now his benefit to this team is playing him everywhere.
Alan English, some of these Shawshank Redemption people just can't get over the fact that I don't like that movie. In terms of national, Alan English, I'm just giving you a hard time. In terms of national perception, the Ademiolas are going to break out like Andy Dufresne. I look for them to be a national storyline before the year is out. I think that's accurate because if they're both playing well, it's a story because they're twins.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost too easy of a story, to be honest with you. It's low hanging fruit that a lot of national media will grab onto. So I agree with that completely.
We have some people that agree with some of our assessments, Vince. John Murray says, good day, IB. I believe Ryan Barnes will work his way into a rotational or starting position at corner. Connor Nepper says, Riley Mills is my sleeper defensive player of the year. Let's go 99. And he also reminds everyone to hit the like button, IB Nation.
Absolutely.
Sean Kane asks, who do you guys see being more effective in a backup role this year at end, Alexander Ahrensberger or Nana? Can I say both?
Yeah.
And here's what I mean by that, right? I'm not cheating and taking a lazy answer. I think it depends on what we're looking for. I think Alexander Ahrensberger is going to be the more disruptive rotation player. He'll have some sacks, he'll have some big plays. We've already seen that from him. I mean, he was the guy that forced Desmond Ridder to tuck the ball right before Isaiah Foskey stripped it from him, and he took off running. So I think that's obviously something we have to look at. I think when you look at Nana's more of a down one and down two, run defender, strong at the point of attack kind of guy. I think that's where I see him being the more effective player. So I think both is mine, Vince.
Yeah, I hope Nana steps up. I have less faith in Nana than I do in Ahrensberger right now, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. That's just Nana has battled some injuries and things of that nature, and I hope that he steps up and is able to be that guy. I just if I'm forced to rank them, I would say Alexander over Nana right now, but again, that's only because of what I've seen up to this point.
All right. Sean, Jimmy James says, can Love play the slot? Please say yes so I can dream we get him and Richard Young. The reality is that can he play the slot? I don't know. I don't think he's that kind of receiver. Maybe he is. I think Jay Lamar could be that guy. But I think the thing about Jeremiah Love is you read the article that's on the front page of Irish Breakdown today. He said to Ryan Roberts, I don't want to be considered a running back. I'm an all-around athlete. I can play running back. I can play receiver. I can play corner. We think he could also play safety. So getting him and Richard Young is not going to be a battle against each other. You're not taking one over the other. You take them both. So whether he can play slot or not, you're taking him. I mean, the fact that he wants to be recruited as an athlete helps your cause in that instance. Because if you get Richard Young, it's not like, well, Jeremiah, we don't have room for. He's like, fine, whatever. I can play wherever. And that's what he wants to do. So that's a really interesting aspect to that recruitment. Travis Connor said, just joined, so sorry if it's been discussed. Are we still high on Prince Kali? He seemed like a hot name as the next Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah for a while, but that talk seems to have fizzled. That talk has only fizzled because he's not playing Rover anymore. But I think there's a lot of people still high on him. The difference is what did we say about Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah's first 2 years? Not a lot. He didn't play. He played one snap of special teams in his first 2 years of college football. Prince Kali's already done way more than Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah did his first 2 years. So I don't think he's been dismissed. I just think right now, Vince, there's older players that are ahead of him who are also really good, and that tends to happen when you're at a program like Notre Dame. So that would be my stance on that. Do you have anything to add to that conversation?
I talked about my love for Prince Kali. I think he's going to be a rotation player. I think he's going to be a really important piece of what they're doing defensively. And I think you're going to get a ton of play from the will linebacker position, and that's where he's backing up right now. And so he's going to play, and he's going to make plays, and it's going to be fun to watch. Whoever they put at will is going to be fun to watch. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Blaine Tiller asks, I think Marist is going to be great, but do you think some of the hype on him was because of the quality of the other linebackers last year versus this year? No.
Not at all.
No, because we talked about Marist before last year. He was a breakout player for us a year ago. I mean, this isn't the first time we talked about it. What we're saying now, we thought we were going to get last year before he got hurt. It's about Marist. And I think that, and I think that's a very fair question, Vince. It's a very fair question. Number one, it's not relative to what was at the position in the previous time. It's what this player will produce. He would be in that even if let's just say J.D. Bertrand was an absolute monster last year and Jack Kaiser was a great player last year. I'd still be saying the same thing about Marist because I would still slide J.D. over to Mike and I would have Marist at will, and he would break out from a injured guy who had 22 tackles the year before to a really good player no matter what.
So players on the field. J.D. is one of those players right now, and he proved it last year, right? So, yeah, absolutely.
Jonathan Fish asks, is Vince the president of the Cam Hart fan club? If Vince is the president of Cam Hart fan club, and Ryan is the president of the Marist fan club, which current players fan club is Brian the president of? I'm going to let you guess that one, Vince. Who do you think I am the president of the fan club?
But he's not a player.
Yeah, current players.
No. Yeah. I'm going to say the Jason Ademiola fan club.
Okay. I wouldn't say that I'm the president of his fan club. I just don't think he gets enough respect as a player.
You're a member of the fan club.
I don't know because I feel like being part of a fan club means like you kind of jump in on board without actual evidence of it being true yet.
Ooh,
right.
Okay.
Like, and I mean that in a respectful manner because you jumped on the Cam Hart thing before there was. Look, and I thought he was going to be a really good player too, but I just was like, well, let's see him play, and you're like, nope, don't need to see him play. He's going to be great, right? And and Ryan's like that with Marist. So I think it comes down to, I mean, Jason's been a rotation guy from the moment he stepped on campus in Notre Dame. And I just never felt he got the respect for what he's done. Right. So it's not, I wouldn't say him. I don't know who I would pick on that. That's a really good one. I'd say, you know who I would say? Chris Tyree.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because but again, it also comes down to because I don't think he gets the respect that maybe he should. Yeah. I think Chris Tyree is going to be a game changer for Notre Dame. Again, maybe it doesn't equal 1,500 yards, and maybe he only gets 8 carries a game, but in those 8 carries a game, he's going to be really dynamic. So, and he's from Virginia, so he's got that going for him too. So that certainly helps. Yeah, certainly helps. Ryan said just texted me, said Avery Davis. I don't think that's we almost forgot to talk about him the other day. So
I almost put him on my breakout player list.
Yeah.
But I'm just not sure how high of a ceiling he has. I just don't know the answer to that. I think he's going to end up being, if he's healthy all season, I think that he's going to be a very reliable, very go-to type of player this year at wide receiver. So I almost had him on my list, but I just don't know how high the ceiling is. You know what I mean? Because he's been a starter. Yep. So does that mean he's going to be a star? I don't know about that, but I think he's going to be a very, very reliable starter. So.
I thought you were going to guess Drew Pine. That's what I thought you were going to guess. Yeah. I thought you were going to guess Drew Pine. Man,
you are a fan.
So. Anthony Oz, can Notre Dame's defense and the secondary contain Ohio State's receivers on opening day? Can they? Yes, of course they can. Will they?
Oh, we'll see.
To be seen.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think the thing is like the way that Ohio State ended the season and the way that Notre Dame ended the season in those two areas has people thinking that they're just going to throttle Notre Dame. I want to remind people that a lot of Ohio State's production was coming against backups and a converted running back. And I don't mean converted like Cam Hart was converted. I mean a guy that was rushing and carrying the ball in that game who had to play corner because they had so many injuries.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think that, and again, I think neither game was necessarily truly indicative of what either team was, good and bad. Like we've talked about how I'm not super high on Ohio State's defense. They're not as bad as they looked in that bowl game, though. You know what I mean? And so I think we sometimes put too much onto bowl games. Is Ohio State's receiving core going to be really good? Yeah. We talked about that yesterday. We talked about how it's absurd to have, Ryan and I talked about how it's absurd to have Alabama's receiving core coming back ranked ahead of Ohio State's receiving core coming back. It's absolutely absurd. We would rank Ohio State's receiving core probably as the best number one group coming into the country. But I also think that the problem with this discussion is a lot of people think that Notre Dame's secondary is just going to suck.
Right.
And I'll be like, Notre Dame's played some pretty good receiving cores in recent years. You know what I mean? Like the one they played against Alabama in 2020 didn't suck. And, they had a hard time defending Devontae Smith, but they had some success against those other guys. And that was without a front seven like the one that they're going to have. And even now, I think you look at last year, like with North Carolina, they did well in some games. Against North Carolina, they didn't. Against some other guys, they did. So can they? Yes. Will they? We'll see. I think what it comes down to is the best way to slow down Ohio State's receivers is to dominate at the line of scrimmage.
Nailed it.
That's the way to slow them down. I mean, if the quarterback's rushed and getting the ball out, I mean, that's something that helped, I would say, Oregon. Is Ohio State put up their yards, but they didn't put up points because the ball was coming out quickly and because the pass rush, even though they didn't have to cave on Thibodeau, I think that's what helped Michigan especially. Is, again, Ohio State's going to get their yards. The key is keeping the points down, and you keep the points down by forcing the quarterback to throw more passes and getting the ball out quicker so you can rally to the ball so you're limiting the big plays. I think when Ohio State gets real dangerous is when they're ripping off big plays in the pass game. And that's when that's when the points come. If they're going to get, like I said, they're going to get their yards. Just the nature of the offense is they're going to get their yards. But can you allow them to get their yards from a higher volume? Because what would you say were the three worst games Ohio State had last year? I would argue that it was Oregon, Michigan, and Nebraska. Okay. They scored 26 points against Nebraska. Nebraska had the ball in the fourth quarter with a chance to take a lead against Ohio State. And guess what else those three games have in common? Those are the three games they had the highest number of pass attempts. 54 against Oregon, 54 against Nebraska, 49 against Michigan, right? And the completion percentage was also lower in those games. I thought Ohio State struggled on offense early on, especially against Tulsa, completed 60% of his passes. So I think when you look at those outcomes, I think those are things you look at and say, if you can force him to speed up throws, get the ball out quicker, force his reads, that's when he'll make mistakes. As all quarterbacks do when you pressure them. I mean, that's true of every quarterback. If you get in their face, consistently pressure them, they're going to make mistakes.
And yeah, I think that it's that, and then you have to try to contain their running back. That kid is a stud. You have,
and that's what makes that offense truly dangerous. All the focus is on the receivers. The thing is, like, if it's just the receivers, that's I'm not worried about stopping that. Right. It's that you focus too much on the receivers, and Trayvon Henderson's going to go for $180.
That kid is special. You've got. If you can contain their run game and you can get in the face of CJ Stroud, you're going to have success. I'm not predicting a victory. I'm not necessarily saying that, but if you're looking for a game plan, that's the game plan. You have to control their run game, and you have to make quarterback Stroud feel uncomfortable. That's how you get to Ohio State's offense, period. So if you give me the option of who I'm shutting down, Henderson or Smith and Jigba, I'm going with Henderson. I am. I just feel like there's other ways that you can attack the pass game.
Agree. Let's get to a few more here, Vince. We have a super chat from ICURN with Irish Luck. I would say Brian is leading the Riley Mills fan club. I am subscribed to that club too. I think that's fair. I wouldn't say that would be the club I would project myself to be, but I think that's fair. I mean, as much as we've kind of talked about what we think it can be, I think that's fair. I think there's a couple other guys you could probably talk about, like Xavier Watts. I'm surprised nobody said Xavier Watts. Surprised about that one too. So we'll see.
Avatar looks nice.
Yeah. Archer 452. If Notre Dame goes 11-1, will that be enough to get into the playoff? Last year, 11-1 wasn't enough, but the schedule this year seems stronger. Only one ranked win last year. Last year's 11-1, they didn't deserve to get in the playoff.
I mean, week 11-1.
We laid out the path for them. I mean, we had this very show, Vince, at the end of the year, going into the championship game of, here's the path for Notre Dame to get in. And if Georgia beats Alabama in the SEC title game, Notre Dame's a playoff team. I mean, it's just simple as that. But at the same time, we also talked about the fact that their resume was unimpressive. we thought they were going to be a playoff team and wanted them in the playoff because we felt, again, this was
we like the matchups. We like,
there were and they were playing hot. They were hot going into the year. And you take Bama out, and it's like, okay, I think there's some matchups that could be favorable to Notre Dame in the postseason. Like, I would have loved a rematch against Cincinnati. I would have loved to have played Michigan last year. And Georgia is not the kind of team that's given Notre Dame problems. Like again, look what happened the last 2 times Notre Dame played Georgia, right? Oh, they're going to dominate Notre Dame in the line of scrimmage. Okay. Now, that was the one that I think Notre Dame does not beat Georgia last year. No chance, because Georgia would have destroyed Notre Dame's offensive line. My point is they wouldn't have hung a 40 spot on Notre Dame either. That was kind of my point there. But the thing, like you said, the end of the year, Archer, they had 0 wins over teams ranked in the top 25.
It's hard to defend. I mean, you can't defend that from an on-paper resume
You're
standpoint.
hanging your hat on beating a 9-4 Wisconsin team that lost to Minnesota.
Won it with amazing defense at the end of the game.
Yeah, you were losing in the fourth quarter. Exactly. Your second best win is a win over a 9-4 Purdue team. I mean, come on. Purdue lost at home to Minnesota. They lost at home to Wisconsin. They got destroyed by Ohio State. Like, that's what you're hanging your playoff resume on. You don't deserve to be in the playoff.
It is what it is. And we said that. I mean, we said that going in. Right. We liked the match in the playoff, but they didn't deserve to be. So
this year, if Notre Dame's 11-1, they're going to have a win over Ohio State or Clemson, or potentially both, because there's a scenario where they beat both and lose to like a BYU or something like that, right? So it'll be much tougher. Plus, I think BYU is going to be a top 25 team this year. I think USC will be better. I think the schedule overall is going to be I think BC is going to be better than what they were last year if Phil stays healthy. I think North Carolina is going to be better than what people think this year. I think they're a sleeper team for me.
Harder than it was last year.
Well, on paper, it's not. That's the interesting thing, because if you look on paper, their 12 opponents have a combined losing record. That's with 10-win Ohio State, or 10-win Clemson, 10-win Ohio State, and 11-win Ohio State and 10-win BYU, because you have 4-8 USC, you have 2-10 UNLV, you have like 2-10 Navy. Well, we don't think USC is going to be 4-8 again. Right? Exactly. Like, we think BC is going to be better than 6-6 this year, because if you look at what they were when Phil played, they were 4-2. When he didn't play, they were 2-4. Right? And so, I think those are some things I look at, Vince, and I say, some of the teams that were not good last year are going to be better. I think Stanford's going to be better. I don't think they're going to be good, but they're going to be better than 3-9 last year.
Wise, it will help the overall record. I just look at last year. You're right. It's an under 500 schedule.
It's much tougher at the top. That's the one thing I know for sure. It's a much tougher schedule at the top. The top 4 this year is much tougher than the top 4 last year.
Those are the wins that you need for a resume, right? I mean, those are the marquee, because we talk about, okay, what was Notre Dame's best win last year? I know, Wisconsin, Purdue, but if they're 11-1 next
end of the year, we're begging for Wisconsin or Purdue to keep winning, so they might get a team in the top 25 of the college football playoff rankings.
It was a futile attempt.
Right. And that was what, I mean, look, Archer, you're new to the channel. We talked about that before the season. Yeah. That's why we were so pissed at the way Brian Kelly coached the team, because it was a down year in college football. We knew Ohio State wasn't going to be as good as they were the year before, because they had lost a lot of guys. We knew that Alabama wasn't going to be as good as they were the year before. We knew that there just wasn't we had predicted Clemson was going to be down. I didn't think they were going to go start the year 1-3, but we knew they were going to be down. Like, that was a year that was a perfect opportunity where Notre Dame's schedule was tough-ish, but we thought it was super, because they had like North Carolina as a top 10 team. Right. They had USC as a top 25 team, which we thought was patently absurd. It was just, you look at the schedule, and they thought Wisconsin was going to be a top 10 to 13 team, and we're like, no, they're not going to be that good. I thought it was going to be tougher than it was, but I didn't think it was going to be as tough as people made it out to be, because there was people predicting 8-4 and 7-5 last year, which is absurd. And it was just like, it was a down year in college football. It was a lot like 2017. And that's why losing at home to freaking Cincinnati was so frustrating. And Brian Kelly's inability to make the right moves to get the team where he needs to get to was so frustrating, because last year was a year that was there for the taking. And that's what was so frustrating about the whole thing. And
Brian Kelly could have ridden off into the sunset.
Yeah. Yeah, with a title. Yeah. If he would have made – now, again, that would have required a new O-line coach. I mean, they weren't winning a title with the staff as it was constructed. They could have been in a playoff game and maybe won a playoff game, depending on who they were seeded against. If they would have been seeded against Georgia, They're losing. But let's just say they would have been able to climb up to number 3 or something. Okay, then that's a matchup I'd have felt a whole lot better about. So that would have made it very interesting. But yeah, I look at it and it was a frustrating year. This year, I think there's going to be better teams. I think this is going to be a bounce back year. I was talking about the friend. I think the Big Ten is going to be better than it was last year. It's going to be deeper than it was last year. I think the Big 12 is going to be interesting. I don't know if it's going to be as good at the top, but there's some teams that are coming along. I think the Pac-12 is going to be interesting. I think the ACC is going to be better than it was last year because Clemson's going to be better. They're not going to be what they were, but they're going to be better. BC is going to be better. I think Carolina's going to have a bounce back. Pitt's not dominating the ACC this year. I can promise you that. The SEC is going to have a bounce back year. I think the SEC was down big time last year. I think the SEC is going to be better. So I think it's going to be a fun year. I really do. And moral of the story, to kind of answer your question, if Notre Dame goes 11-1 this year, yes, they're in. The only exception would be is if there's 3 undefeated teams and a 12-1 one law, a 12-1 conference champ. I think that might make it harder for Notre Dame. But yes, Notre Dame at 11-1 with the schedule they have now, assuming their loss isn't like last game of the year in a blowout, or let's say they beat Ohio State but then get blown out at home by Clemson or something like that. As long as it's not something strange, 11-1 gets Notre Dame in the playoff this year, in my opinion. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I don't think it's even close, to be perfectly honest with you. So
yep. And then Irish Chi-Town, will CJ Carr start as a true freshman? Also, is there a chance that if we get Dante Moore, that Carr will be redshirted? Yeah, I mean, there's a chance. I think I'll address the second one first. If Notre Dame gets Dante Moore and CJ Carr, when the starting job opens, they're not going to redshirt CJ Carr immediately. They're going to let those guys battle for the job. And then if Dante Moore wins the job, then yes, CJ Carr would redshirt, which would be the perfect world scenario for me. And what I think would be great for Notre Dame. But will he start as a true freshman? The only way CJ starts as a true freshman is if some things go really bad for Notre Dame the next few years. Because I don't think Tyler Buckner's a 3-year player. I think Tyler Buckner's a 4-year player. I could be wrong about that. He could be so good the next 2 years that he leaves early. I just don't see that, like leaving after 2023, Vince. So I think he'll be back in 2024. So I don't think CJ would take a starting job. Right. But if they're in a situation where Tyler is that good and he leaves early, I think they would try to go get a grad transfer. Is what I think. And now, could CJ beat that guy out? Maybe. We'll see. I can't project the kid whose film I've only seen as a sophomore into starting as a true freshman. I just can't.
A certain way on the current Notre Dame team as well for that to be even a possibility. So there's just too many question marks to that.
Yeah. Again, could he end up being that good? Maybe. I mean, but yeah. I've only seen sophomore film. Like to me, it's way too early to kind of get to that point, in my opinion, Vince. I don't know if you agree with that. It's hard for me to even.
Too many ifs. There's too many ifs. I don't like that stuff just because there's just too many questions. It's too far. Yeah. A lot of things are happening for me between now and then.
Yep. Let's get to a couple more here, Vince. Timeout Tom asks, now that the 2021 season is long past, tell us the real reason Kane Madden played. Well, I don't
because
know
they recruited him to come, and they probably told him you're going to play, and he played, and it is what it is.
I'm pretty confident they did not promise him anything. I think it just comes down to you had an incompetent coach who didn't know how to get younger players ready to go. It's as simple as that. And they just kept throwing him out there thinking that eventually they were going to get the guy they saw in film at Marshall. And they didn't have a coach that could get that out of him. I mean, there's no conspiracy. There's no such and such was in the doghouse. It wasn't that. It was just sheer incompetence, in my opinion, from a coaching standpoint. I mean, there's nothing more to it than that. Maybe there's something more to it, Tom. I don't know the answer to that. All I know is that they just looked at that kid and felt that he gave them the best chance at right guard. And the funny thing is if you'd talk to people, like they would defend him and how well he played, which was absurd to me. And it's like Kelly would like, oh, so and so. Remember that time, Vince? Vince almost lost it. I thought Vince was going to go off. Where Kelly was talking about how well Kane Madden played, and you were like, he watched a completely different game than we watched because he was terrible.
What are you talking about, man?
Yeah.
Anybody with any kind of a football IQ and has watched any kind of film, just how you can just bold-faced lie like that was mind-boggling to me. I don't care if he's engaged to your daughter. Like you just can't lie like that. You can't do it.
But he did that like just with like without even like breaking a sweat. Like
I hope the people on the bayou enjoy that.
He was such a good liar that I think sometimes he could convince himself that his lie was the truth.
Yeah,
like
that's pathological. By
the way. Yeah. Anyway, moving on. James Lawrence Zenzi, Pac-12 is soft, and they will have a high-powered offense. I really like their quarterback, but I don't think like Lincoln Riley. Hope he flames out there. I was talking about USC, kind of breaking out.
Overall, I'm not over impressed with the Pac-12. So I think what he's saying is USC is going to have a good record, and I think they probably have a good record, and they'll probably be ranked. Notre Dame plays them, and then Notre Dame has to take care of business on the field.
I got to see it first.
I do, but
look. I was talking about this before the show. Oh, look at the quarterback they had and all the receivers. I'm like, in 2018, they had Michael Pittman, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tyler Vaughns, and Velus Jones, and they had JT Daniels, a quarterback, and they went 5-7. Why? Because they sucked in the trenches on both sides of the ball, and they had no talent on defense. Their talent on defense is worse now than it was then, and their offensive line is still a hot mess. So there's this notion that they're just going to be 10-2. Like, so this USC team is going to be just as good as last year's Oklahoma team without any of the – I mean, Oklahoma had like 4 defensive players get drafted last year, including a couple D linemen that got drafted high. They had 3 D linemen get drafted last year, and their defense still sucked. And yet this same coaching staff is going to turn this USC defense with very few NFL players into something that's going to allow them to have the same record that Oklahoma had against not a great conference. I just don't see it. Now, will they have a better record than 4-8? Yeah. Do I think they could maybe go 8-4? Sure. Is it possible for them to be better 8-4? Of course, because the Pac-12 sucks. But I mean, I don't get it. I mean, we see it every year. I made a joke about this the other day, Vince, like when ESPN jumped USC up to number 4 in their rankings when they got Jordan Addison, and I'm like, this is the same outlet that had Texas A&M 5th last year, that had Iowa State and North Carolina in the top 10 last year. And you and I laughed at all 3 of those at the time because it's like y'all are on drugs. They had USC in the top 20 last year. There's just certain teams that they just overrank. They're going to keep predicting Texas A&M to be a top 5-6 team until they do it. And the funny thing is they finally jumped off the Michigan bandwagon the year that Michigan went to the playoff, which I think is freaking hilarious. Because remember, every year they're putting Michigan, this is the year that Michigan goes to the playoff. And then last year they finally got off the bandwagon because of how bad they were in the COVID year, and they went to the playoff. I freaking love it. That'll be what happens. And no, it won't be what happens because Jimbo's an incredibly overrated coach. So I just find that to be flipping hilarious. All right. D. Troll Hunter says, my lazy comp for Tobias is Justin Ross, but that is the impact I expect. I think he's more T. Higgins, to be honest with you. I don't think Tobias Justin Ross before the injuries, Vince, was a burner. Mm-hmm. I mean, his freshman year numbers, it's like I think it was 49 catches for 1,000 yards. Let me look it up. 46 catches for 1,000 yards. I think Tobias is more of like what T was that year, 59 catches for 936 yards and 12 touchdowns. Like, I think that's more of what T. Higgins is to me. I just think he's more of that kind of guy to me. Now, T the next year had looked more like what Justin did with 59 catches, 11, 67, and 13. I just think he's a different kind of player than Justin Ross, but he's a big time talent in my opinion. There's no doubt. Here's an interesting one, Vince. I'll let you answer this one from Siggy13. Clemson plays Syracuse before a bye week before Notre Dame. Notre Dame plays Syracuse before playing Clemson. How much does that help having a common opponent the game prior in terms of film comparisons and that? Let's say this. In film, it doesn't matter. I think the second part is the one, Vince, that I want you to address on, and that is the comparison. Like, the talent of one and the talent of the other.
I think that's the key, because you're going to be able to, okay, if this kid was able to do this against this kid, then our kid should be able to do this against that kid, et cetera, et cetera. Look, common opponents is very helpful. It is. It's very helpful. And we mentioned that. Remember when we had a show a couple of weeks ago and we were talking about this. and how Notre Dame will have obviously access to the Syracuse-Clemson game as they're preparing for Syracuse. And it's going to be very difficult for them to watch that film without looking at Clemson thinking that's the bigger game. You know what I mean? Like that's where the film can hurt you. But having a common opponent, I think, is awesome. I actually like that no matter what sport you're playing, because you have something that you can actually compare things off of. And I think that's key. It's important. Syracuse is not going to be a great football team, but from a comparisons standpoint, I think it is very beneficial.
Yeah, because it's like, hey, we know what this guy does because we played him, and we know this guy's not good, and this guy gave them problems or something. I mean, there's things that you can look at like that. So, yes, that's a good way of going there, Vince. And then Carl Bremer, we have last couple comments and questions. Carl Bremer says, I think North Carolina is going to be a 9-3 or 10-2 team. There's nobody on their schedule they shouldn't beat outside of Notre Dame, but they love to lose a few games they shouldn't. Beat Wake Forest, but lose to Georgia Tech. Yeah, that's kind of what they do. I don't know if they'll get to 10-2, but I think 8-4, 9-3 is certainly possible with that football team. If they didn't have to play Notre Dame non-conference, I would be right there with you. Look, I know that they lost Sam Howell, and that was huge, and they lost a couple really good offensive linemen, but they got a lot of other guys coming back. The change on defensive coordinator, even though I'm not a huge Gene Chizik fan, he's a solid defensive coordinator. Solid is a huge upgrade over what they were. And so I think the talent's there. They've recruited well under Mac. I think that's going to play a role. And I think that they're just going to get slept on a little bit. I think they had way too much pressure on them last year, and I don't think their team was prepared to handle that.
Well with that, yeah. I'm North Carolina's schedule. I see 9 wins on here, and with the possibility of others. You know what I mean? I see 9 potential wins there, and they could lose one of those and maybe win another one. So I don't think 9 wins is out of the realm of possibility for North Carolina. And if that's the case, guess what? That helps Notre Dame.
Right. Right. Here's an interesting comment that we had from ICRN. Kelly takes up for Madden, but throws Sam under the bus for being unable to snap on a hurricane. You got to understand the motivation behind one or the other. In throwing Sam Mustipher under the bus protected him from his poor decisions. Defending Kane Madden protected him from his poor decisions. That's the theme. That's the theme. Correct. That's the thing you have to focus on with him. It's always going to be about what did I do? What can I do to make sure that I'm not criticized for whatever decisions I make? Exactly. Right? And that's going to be the key to that. So, Vince, that is going to do it for today's show. Everyone, I want to thank you all for joining us today. Appreciate you all so much. Very good questions today. Very good engagement and interaction today. And before you leave, y'all, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. We will have a 6 o'clock show tonight, Vince. Sean Stiers is actually on the road driving to Omaha. I'm actually going to check now to make sure that he actually did record the show. Did you do that with him by chance, Vince?
I did not.
Okay, so I see Sean's Thursday show is on there. So we do have that. So we'll be here tonight at 6. We will kind of introduce the show and then play Sean's recorded show. So we will have that tonight at 6 o'clock. Awesome. Just to keep you guys kind of in that normal schedule, that normal deal that we're going to do with him. And then, of course, it's a Monday to Thursday show. And we'll be back tomorrow on Friday for
Friday free-for-all mailbag, baby.
Vince's favorite day of the week. There's no doubt about that. It's his favorite day of the week. And then, of course, Saturday, Sean and I have a Saturday show planned. It's going to be a lot of fun. We've already kind of picked out the topics. Some very interesting topics this week that we're looking forward to talking. And, of course, join the message board, boards.irishbreakdown.com. We've got tons of merch. Built Bar's rocking and rolling. They've got some new flavors coming out. You're going to want to check that. Use the Irish Breakdown promo code to get 10% off your entire purchase. And just keep helping us out, right? The traffic on the articles has been slow. It's funny, Vince. People say, why don't you talk about the team more? So I do a running back preview yesterday. Nobody reads it. And it's like, this is why. Because, nobody reads that stuff in June and July. I would love to do nothing but talk about the team nonstop. But, I also got to make money. And right now, people don't click on that stuff.
They're not reading it. They're not reading it.
That's the reality of it. But anyway, everybody, have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Vince, for joining me. Appreciate everybody's patience for why things took a little bit longer to get there. But we got rocking and rolling. So that's what matters. So we appreciate y'all. Have a great show. We will talk to you all again very, very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.